Okay, yes, it is happening, folks. All of this is happening as my intro stated. And boy, we need help, don't we? Yes, we do. And if I talk long enough here, I won't have to get to the stories that I really am so tired of talking about. The ghosts of St. Joseph Orphanage, nuns killing kids. Oh boy. Priests raping children. How many of these stories can we take over the centuries before we realize that this is a sick Luciferian organization, and the real stuff that goes on, they don't want you to know about, so they put this out there. Yeah, that's what this is all there, and then it takes years for the media to cover it, and then when they do cover it, they get it all wrong anyway. But one last thing on Jones before I do get to that story about St. Joseph Orphanage. Listen, they consider him a far-right website. Let me read from a mainstream article about this. Apple, YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify have all removed Jones' content from their platforms over the last week or so, and backlash against the conspiracy theories he touts through his far-right website, InfoWars. It's a far-right website? The media giants said Jones violated their community standards with his inflammatory content. Who are the media giants? Now, are they media or are they private? Is Facebook like the New York Times? Well, if they are, they should be held to the same standards. And even though this guy's a COINTEL operator, they shouldn't be allowed to shut him down. But they shut him down because he can be a real good example of what's going to happen to everybody else. And a lot of things he talks about, you can probably prove. But here's how it's depicted to Joe Average American who have no idea about this stuff. Jones rose to prominence by touting a wide range of unverified and demonstrably false claims. Now, can you imagine what they'll say about a show like mine, who has been called over the years the alternative to the alternative media? And what is the reason? Because we cover the Vatican-led New World Order. Now, can you imagine what people will say about this show? I mean, it will soon be labeled hate speech, commonly here. I won't be able to leave China or get by land, and people who talk about it won't either. And if they do kind of like what they're doing in China and can facially recognize you and then have a complete dossier on you, my goodness, I'll score like 10%. I won't be able to go on an airplane. People in China that aren't in the government, don't pass the government test, can't get on an airplane either. So they got on, they say that about Jones, he's unverified and demonstrably claims. Well, listen to what they say. He's argued that the September 11, 2001 attacks on the U.S. were staged and that the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012 was a hoax to promote gun control. Neither one was true. Well, how do they know it's not true? That's what they say. That's the government's story on this. We know that 9/11 was not as the government said and was a staged terrorist attack by your own people. Yeah, supported by the U.S. government. That is a fact. So he can cover that. He's right on that. And then, but he's given this kind of publicity because everybody that reads it's going to say, who can say that 9/11 was an inside job? They're crazy. And who can say that Sandy Hook Elementary School was a staged shooting? See what happens? Now, it should be interesting because they'll settle out of court on this. The Sandy Hook conspiracy theory has landed him in court where he faces a $1 million lawsuit from the family of a Sandy Hook victim who says they've been harassed by his followers. Okay, who are his followers? Well, it's all far-right people. We got to get rid of these. How can he be considered far-right? He is one of them that's making people on the right or people that want to get to the truth look bad to the mainstream. They've used him all along. He knows it. He's being paid to be this guy. And that's where we stand today. So It's getting like China. And I guess we're going to follow China's lead when we see all the control of people, because they can't control a one world government, one world order without implementing their plan, and China is the vanguard in this, I believe. And we'll see what happens. Now here we go. The headline is, "We Saw Nuns Kill Children, the Ghosts of St. Joseph Catholic Orphanage." And without further comment, let me start this story. It was late summer. It was a late summer afternoon, Sally Dale recalled, when the boy was thrown through the fourth floor window. He kind of hit, and she placed both hands palm down before her. Her right hand slapped down on the left, rebounded up a little, then landed again. For just a moment the room was still. "Bounced?" one of the many lawyers present asked. "Well, I guess you'd call it that. It was a bounce," she replied, and then he laid still. For just a moment the room was still. Okay, Sally, who was speaking under oath, tried to explain it. She started again. "The first thing I saw was looking up, hearing the crash of the window, and then him going down, but my eyes were still glued." She pointed up at where the broken window would have been, and then she pointed at her own face and drew circles around it. That habit thing, whatever it is, that they wear, stuck out like a sore thumb. "A nun was standing at the window," Sally said. She straightened her arms out in front of her, but her hands were like that. "There were only two people in the yard," she said, "Sally herself and a nun who was escorting her." In a tone that was still completely bewildering, she recalled asking, "Sister?" Sister took hold of Sally's ear, turned her around, and walked her back to the other side of the yard. The nun told her she had a vivid imagination. "We're going to have to do something about you, child." I'm looking at a picture of this place, and it looks like a prison. But anyway, it says, "The back of the now closed St. Joseph Orphanage in Burlington, Vermont." Okay, so now we know what we're talking about. Sally figured the boy fell from the window in 1944. Wow, a good investigation here by people, right? It's now 2018. This is what we talk about here. It's never going to end. But let's read, and we're going to do this story, and then people that read it or talk about this show will be outraged, and many will say, "Oh, it can't be true. It's on his show." So, although I know nothing will change, let me continue. So Sally figured the boy fell from the window in 1944 because she was moving to the big girls' dormitory that day. Girls usually move when they were 6, though residents of St. Joseph Orphanage in Burlington, Vermont did not always have a clear sense of their age. Birthdays, like siblings and even names, being one of the many human attributes that were stripped from them when they passed through its doors. She recounted his fall in a deposition on November 6, 1996, as part of a remarkable group of lawsuits that 28 former residents brought against nuns, the diocese, the social agency that oversaw the orphanage. Why didn't we hear about this in 1996? Because the media covers up these stories. They wait till maybe 100 years passes. I watched the deposition, all 19 hours of grainy, sketchy, scratchy videotape more than 2 decades later. By that time, sexual abuse scandals had ripped through the Catholic Church, shattering the silence that had for so long protected its secrets. Look, half the secrets are still there, more than half. We are just at the tip of the iceberg. It was easier for accusers in general to come forward, and easier for people to believe their stories, even if the stories sounded too awful to be true. Even if they had happened decades ago, when the accusers were only children, even if the people they were accusing were pillars of the community. But for all these revelations, including this month's Pennsylvania grand jury report on how the church hid the crimes of hundreds of priests in Pennsylvania, a darker history, the one to which Sally's story belongs, remains all but unknown. Well, let me add, I've covered a lot of these deep, dark stories over the years. Many people know about them, but the people at the top will never let justice happen. They will live like they're in a fog. What are you talking about? This stuff doesn't go on. But it's the history, says Ms. Kennerly, of unrelenting physical and psychological abuse of captive children across thousands of miles, across decades. The abuse took eerily similar forms. People who grew up in orphanages said they were made to kneel or stand for hours, sometimes with their arms straight out, sometimes holding their boots or some other item. They were forced to eat their own vomit. They were dangling upside down windows over wells or in laundry chutes. Children were locked in cabinets, in closets, in attics, sometimes for days, sometimes so long they were forgotten. They were told their relatives didn't want them, or they were permanently separated from their siblings, they were sexually abused, they were mutilated. But our government officials, known about this for years, have hidden it, and now the only thing that's going to get talked about is, don't spank your child, you'll go to jail. For a little spanking. But it's okay to let these kids eat vomit, put them in closets, hang them from windows, throw them out windows. That's all right. Because it happens, it doesn't go on. Not in the good Vatican Church. That's why all these politicians still run to Rome and still applaud all of the beauty and the pomp of the Vatican. It's insane. Darkest of all, it is a history of children who entered orphanages but did not leave them alive. I might add, we've talked about this many times in other places. And let me tell you this, it gets shut down. You think YouTube's you're gonna get 1 million hits on this? Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. From former residents of America's Catholic Orphanage system, this writer had heard stories about these deaths. That they were not natural or even accidents, but were instead the inevitable consequence of the nuns' brutality. Sally herself described witnessing at least 2 incidents in which she said a child at St. Joseph's died or was outright murdered. It's likely that more than 5 million Americans passed through orphanages in the 20th century alone. At its peak in the 1930s, the American orphanage system included more than 1,600 institutions, partly supported with public funding, but usually run by religious orders, including the Catholic Church. Outside the United States, the orphanage system and the wreckage it produced has undergone substantial scrutiny over the last 2 decades. In Canada, the UK, Germany, Ireland, and Australia, multiple former government inquiries have subpoenaed records, taken witness testimony, and found time and time again that children consigned to orphanages, in many cases, most cases Catholic orphanages, were victims of severe abuse. And on this show, we've covered many things: the Duplessis orphan story in orphanages, the many different situations where nuns were even raped in cloistered nunneries, as well as the genocide in the Jesuit mission schools set up to genocide Native Americans and Native Canadians. In 1998, says Ms. Kennerly here, a UK government inquiry cited exceptional depravity at 4 homes run by the Christian Brothers order in Australia. Now, my question is, why have they allowed this to go on? Well, the time isn't right yet to destroy this organization, to create their new Luciferian system of religion, which is coming. But maybe it's getting closer now. I mean, how long can this go on? Well, I guess they can go on as long as we want if it's hidden from you. So we got the Christian Brothers in Australia. It's heard that a boy was the object of a competition between the brothers to see who could rape him 100 times. Wow. The inquiries focused primarily on sexual abuse, not physical abuse or murder, but taken together, the reports show almost limitless harm that was the result not just of individual cruelty, but a system of abuse. Let me mention one thing. I get criticized a lot for saying the Vatican is a Luciferian organization. Then why, at every Easter service, do they open up with a Luciferian song, saying they worship Lucifer in Latin? In the United States, however, no such reckoning has taken place. I thought we were a country of laws. Do you think that it's not taken place here if it's gone on all over the world? Even today, the stories of these orphanages are rarely told. Well, we've tried here. It doesn't get much coverage outside of here, and they'll say, oh, this guy's nuts. Let alone recognized in any formal way by the government, the public, or the courts. The few times that orphanage abuse cases have been litigated in the U.S., the courts have remained, with few exceptions, generally indifferent. And I'll tell you why. Because they're in the pocket of the Vatican-led New World Order. Private settlements could be as little as a few $1,000s. Government bodies have rarely pursued allegations. So on a journey that lasted 4 years, this reporter went around the country and even around the world in search of the truth about this vast, unnarrated chapter of American experience. Eventually, she focused on St. Joseph's, where the former resident lawsuits had briefly forced the dark history into public view. The former residents of St. Joseph's told of being subjected to tortures, from the straightforwardly awful to the downright bizarre, that were occasionally administered as a special punishment but were often just a matter of course. Their tales were strikingly similar, each adding weight and credibility to the others. In these accounts, St. Joseph emerged as its own universe, governed by a cruel logic, hidden behind brick walls, just a few miles past the quaint streets of downtown Burlington. Bernie Sanders, where are you? Aren't you from Burlington, Vermont? Come on, man. When I start looking around, it seemed that all that remained of St. Joseph's were deposition transcripts and the sharp, bitter memories of the few remaining survivors. Well, you got about 5 minutes. Go get this story BuzzFeed wrote, and you'll see that a lot of the things I talked about 15, 20 years are true. Now, the Diocese of Burlington, well, let me see, I missed something here. But over the couple of years, this writer found that there was far more to discover, more than the formal residents themselves knew, and more than was uncovering during the 1990s legal battle. Though tens of thousands of pages of documents, some of them secret, as well as dozens of interviews, what this writer found at St. Joseph's and other American orphanages was a vast and terrible matrix of corroboration. The Diocese of Burlington, Vermont Catholic Charities, and the Sisters of Providence, the order of nuns who worked there, all chose not to speak with this writer, about these allegations. At the end of my reporting, Monsignor John McDermott of the Burlington Diocese provided a brief statement. Please know that the Diocese of Burlington treats allegations, they always say this, of child abuse seriously. Of course, they do? Yeah, and procedures are in place for reporting to the proper authorities. While it cannot alter the past, the diocese now is doing everything it can to ensure children are protected. For decades, Sally Dale, like so many other children at St. Joseph's, avoided speaking about what happened there. You know, when I was doing the Duplessis orphan story up in Canada, I found the same thing. Many of these people were frightened to come forward as children, and waited most of their lives. As Sally Dale here, she's upwards in her, looks like she's in her 80s. Sally Dale, like so many other children, kept us quiet. Many of the orphans went on to marry and to have children and grandchildren without letting anybody in their family know. They were embarrassed that they spent any time in an orphanage. Imagine if I was, remember the story I told about how cool, that Monsignor that wanted to put me and my brother in one? after my mom passed away? Ooh, boy. Some they trust forever shattered. Their trust had been unable to forge any close connection. Robert Woodman, the attorney who sat beside Sally, had offered them a chance to be heard, to force the world outside to reckon with this. The world outside, Sally and Robert, don't want to know this. They would rather it be kept quiet. They can't have their belief system shattered. They need to believe in these things they were taught as a child, or their life will be shattered. Well, too bad. You weren't abused. You weren't put in a closet. You weren't tortured. Sorry if your belief system is a little bit tortured. That legal effort lasted 3 years. It cost Woodman's law firm dearly and pushed him to the edge emotionally. Decades later, he described it as one of the most wrenching cases in his life. For the former residents of St. Joseph's and for people in Albany and Kentucky and Montana who were emerged from orphanage with similar stories, the fight was something much more. It was a chance for most of them to tell things that have never been heard before and believed. For the Catholic Church, too, the stakes were enormous. Well, anyway, like I said, I got a few minutes, so maybe I'll come back to this story. Or if not, go to it. You can find it at BuzzFeed, The Ghosts of St. Joseph's Catholic Orphanage. We saw nuns kill children. Okay. Why do I say I get so tired of these stories, covering them? Well, my experiences maybe are different than yours. We all look at it differently. I've tried to get this story out many years and find nothing but complete apathy by most people who will not hold this organization accountable, who will not go the extra mile to listen to the victims, will not believe many of the stories that are out there because they don't come from the TV set or they don't come from the New York Times. And when they do come from those places, there's always this idea that this is not the general rule. This is the minority. Well, even if it was the minority, even if it was one, you get an organization that operates this way, why do your politicians and media support them behind the scenes? Why do you exalt these people as great educators of the Jesuit order? These nuns are all so holy and happy. No. You call it for what it is. And you don't, they shouldn't even be here anymore. They probably shouldn't have been here in this country from the beginning. I know the patriots that first came here didn't want them here. For a good reason. They knew this was going to happen. Once the Catholic Church got its fangs into our government and control it from afar. And we're now just learning about it. And my question is, it's too damn late. And if it sounds hopeless, you see if it changes. And I bet you I could look down here 100 years from now and it'll be 10 times worse. So why do you continue to talk about it? Because it's the right thing to do. It's that simple. If it doesn't go any farther, there's nothing else you can do but continue to talk about it and to realize that what's being said needs to be dealt with, even though you know it probably won't. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.